Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. In this video, we're going to talk about gold in the garden, or chartreuse colors in the garden, yellows. These vivid, a lot of the plants in this garden, if you follow along with this channel, we may do the chartreuse color overkill almost, potentially, in this garden, although I don't think so. When I see variegations, when I see variegated plants, when I see chartreuse plants, when I see these gold colored plants, I'm always drawn to them for whatever reason. A lot of people are going to be drawn to what they're drawn to, but they do have a purpose in the garden, and they really do show up. And if you're again following along with the channel and you're seeing this garden through the camera, the reason Steph has set up this angle is this Golden Falls redbud, which is actually starting to lose a little bit of its color. It was much brighter. It's much brighter in the spring, and then it kind of fades to a bit of a greenish yellow later on. But the Florida Sunshine Alyssium back here behind it shows off more and more during the summertime. But both of them kind of anchor the spots that they're in, and then we have green things around them, and they really pop in the middle of that green. And they also give a spot where the different textures and colors of green actually stand out against one another. So that's one of the ways we're using them. But I want to talk through in this video is some of these things are solid, are kind of solid chartreuse. The entire plant is, every leaf on it is this color. Those things down in the south are going to need a little bit more shade typically. So the redbud here is an example of that. And redbuds are typically understory trees or on the edge of the forest kind of trees anyway. And you add this little bit of yellow to it, and it definitely needs some break during the day. Same thing with the Florida Sunshine Alyssium. Again, a lot of what I say in one of these videos could change as you go further north. It may take more sun than it would here. But this Florida Sunshine Alyssium definitely needs a little bit of afternoon shade. And that's true with some variegated plants, some, these chartreuse or gold colored plants as well. Then there's ones that have kind of highlights on them. And there's a Mojo Pittosporum right down here below it, another example of a plant that needs a little bit of afternoon shade to be its most happy. Then there's some plants that have like gold highlights, and we'll show off a couple of those. Those plants with gold highlights frequently actually need the sun in order to show off that chartreuse color. Otherwise, they're just kind of solid green. Here's another example of a plant that has that chartreuse color all the way through it. So every leaf as it came out in the spring had this kind of, bright coloration to it, and then it begins to fade a bit during the summertime, just like we saw over there on the on the redbud. This one's out in quite a bit more sun, and so as a result of that, it's actually getting a little bit of what I would call bleaching on it. Well, not just calling it bleaching, it's actually bleaching. It's getting a white coloration on it, and you'll see that in some of your chartreuse plants. If you're getting a lot of that summer bleaching in them, and it's very early summer at this point, and there's leaves on this thing, they're bleached out already. If you're getting that very early in summer like I am, it's probably telling you the plant's in a little too much sun. And by midsummer, we'll see a lot of that bleaching in this plant. Holly's back here. we have a creature back here behind it. Holly was back there. But again, it was we had this plant out in a little bit more shade, and it was stretching like crazy, wasn't flowering. Moved it out here to a little more sun. So there's a delicate balance here, trying to find a spot in the garden. Now I've got it where it's staying compact and it's blooming well, but again, I am going to get a little bit of bleaching on it during the summertime. But again, this thing was definitely the brightest it was going to be kind of the beginning of April as it was leafing out through May and into early June. By midsummer, it will have lost a lot of that super, super bright color. Over to the right of that, ignore the tools here because we're in the process of doing some construction out here. This ground cover St. John's wort, Brigadoon is the name of it. We actually take the lawnmower and mow this one to the ground during in the late winter, and it comes back like this. It needs a little bit of control right now. It's gotten a little bit larger, covering a little bit larger of an area than I'd like, but it's super easy to control. This one kind of leaves out pink with a pinkish color to it, and then it settles into this. And if you look down into the plant just a bit, you can see a little bit of dark green showing up right in the foliage that's not getting sun on it. This is another one that's kind of a delicate balance for us that needs a little bit of afternoon shade, and that's what it's getting here. It does flower, but a lot of times our flowering plants with the chartreuse foliage, the flower doesn't necessarily show up as well as it would otherwise. It's a yellow flower on a yellow plant, so it's not as showy, but the bees absolutely love the flowers on St. John's wort. Here's another example of one that kind of fades out. A lot of our kind of chartreuse color hosta will lose some of that vivid chartreuse color they have during the spring as it gets hotter. Again, a lot of these things relate to where I'm at in zone 8A in Raleigh, North Carolina. That Weigela over there is a little bit hardier than that. It could go in a little more sun as it goes further north. Same thing with the St. John's wort. These hosta are going to probably hold their color a little bit better, but we hit low 90 degree temperatures very early in May. And we start to lose some of the color out of them. This thing 3 weeks ago was one of the brightest things in the entire garden. And you can see now it's some kind of a combo. It's got a little bit of bleaching on it from some sun and a little bit of a combo between green and gold at this point. This Everillo Carex, on the other hand, tends to hold its color a little better through the entire summer. It does need part shade here in the south. Almost everybody watching can grow this Everillo Carex. You're going to have to place it in different places depending on where you are. If you're deeper in the south, it's definitely going to need a little bit more shade, and as you go further north, it can definitely take more sun. We're kind of in the middle here. We're getting probably 4 hours of direct sun on these Everillo Carex, and they're absolutely loving it. They get back in the shade by about 2 in the afternoon, something like that. That seems to be about the perfect amount here in zone 8A. This is one that certainly almost everybody knows by now. This is Sunshine ligustrum, and it can be kept in whatever shape you want to keep it in. It is a non-invasive ligustrum. It doesn't flower, so it doesn't end up seeding itself. And it has this chartreuse new growth on it all season long. We just planted this one in this area, and it doesn't have a lot of new growth on it, but even without all that new growth, it still looks, still a bright spot in the garden. This thing can be pruned into a conical shape or a round ball, or however you want to grow this one. Our friend Pat McCracken, who owns Garden Treasures Nursery over in Zebulon, North Carolina, is the one that found this plant. And I saw this in his garden years before it was, became available in the trade. And I knew first time I ever saw it, this plant was just going to end up being incredibly popular. It was a matter of observing it for a few years and not having it be, seeding itself, like other Chinese privet do. But knew this plant was going to be one that was just going to take over the world when it was observing it for the very first time, and it sure has. And I can see why. It's just something you can put in the garden and really just not have to do anything to, other than maybe prune once or twice a year to keep it whatever size you need to keep it. Other than that, perfect plant. I think when we go shopping for plants, frequently some of the darker foliage plants will really appeal to you. So like darker foliage Loropetalum, or there's some purple basil here in the garden, or really dark flowers where you can get, almost black, really, really dark purple flowers. Sometimes even red red flowers can be an example of this. This red polka dot plant could be an example of that. They're beautiful in containers, and then you get them home, and sometimes if you have part shade, long shadows, a lot of times these dark foliage things just don't stand out. We actually need to put either chartreuse or green things that maybe have some lighter foliage at different times of the year will make those darker foliage things actually stand out. Otherwise, there's some plants out there that you can plant in a shady spot and walk 25 feet away from, and they just kind of disappear into your mulch, visually. So putting other things with them will help them stand out. So again, as an example of that, this little red splash polka dot plant combined with this lemon lime nandina really allow this to kind of stand out in this container. And again, I get long shadows out here in the late afternoon, and that combo really pops together. Lemon lime nandina is a great plant, and when I see it, it's one of those plants that you put in the ground, and it seems to take a minute for it to really establish itself. And then once it does, 3 or 4 years in the ground, it just is such a great plant. It just doesn't need any pruning. Most of the time we see them about 3 or 4 feet tall, where they've been, established themselves. All that bright new chartreuse color is coming out of it anytime it's actively growing. a nandina that doesn't flower, so it doesn't seed itself. So again, just like that sunshine ligustrum over there, it's not going to be invasive out in the world. But just to keep that in mind, if you're drawn to darker foliage things, sometimes a pop of lighter color in with it will actually make those stand out. Almost everything we've shown so far have basically every leaf has that chartreuse coloration on it as it's coming out. And it may age to slightly darker green color, or it stays brightly chartreuse, whatever. But that's true with pretty much everything we've shown. Then there's a collection of things that only have this coloration out on the very newest growth, and down in the plant, it's green. And this touch of gold holly would be an example of that. So on the outside, if it's getting sunlight, all the new growth on the outside of it will have that coloration to it. But if you pruned it, if you get a little bit of pruning on it, you'll see it's kind of green underneath until it starts to flush back out again. But this is a Hugendorn holly, a gold version of a Hugendorn holly, which I think is one of the better Japanese hollies overall. And then to have this kind of chartreuse coloration of it. Again, it's a plant that's going to behave in the garden. It's only going to get about this tall and about equally as wide, and we'll use other things around it. It's in front of our tomatoes here, and strawberries and some other flowering things. But to plant, we can just pop one of them in the ground and then surround it with other things that really draws your eye into this area and allows the other things to kind of stand out. Here's a space in the front garden. We have a lot of flowering annuals out here, a few annuals and perennials. And then we've got some different foliage colors, this Leanne Claire gets all this new kind of coppery colored growth on it, a few interesting conifers, but then we have these pops of variegation or chartreuse coloration in this bed that really, I think bring this bed together. There's a Abelia back here called Radiance. There's some Creeping Jenny on the other side of the Chamaecyparis over there, covering the ground. Just pops of color. But this Nightlight Chamaecyparis has been one of the stars of this garden since we started on the front garden project. And I had to add a little control to it. I knew it's going to get ultimately too big for the space that it's in. So once a year, in the late winter, I'll prune some on it. And it looked like if you saw that video, it looked like I probably did too much. And but it's just flushed right back out of that. This one's such a great plant. Some of these chartreuse colored conifers can bleach in the summertime, just like I was showing you back in the back garden how some of these things can bleach. This one just resists that bleaching so well. I think like some things like gold mop cypress, and I got a more heat tolerant one we'll wrap this video up with in the back garden. A lot of them can bleach during the summer. Just get that white coloration on the outside of it because it gets so hot here. Again, if you're further north, this may not happen to your chartreuse colored conifers, but this one really resists that. Just such a great pop of color. The vinca underneath it, the blueberry, the native blueberry over here next to it. The whole thing it's just like this ball of sun basically in the middle of this bed. I did a really quick walkthrough count last week, and there are a minimum of 327 different species in this garden. And so it's a lot. There's a lot of different plants here, and we're only showing you just a few of the chartreuse or variegated things in this video because there's a lot of them. But weirdly, we only have one juniper. We have again tons and tons of conifers in this garden, but somehow I think we only have one juniper. This one is called Golden Joy, and it's there's lots of ground cover junipers, and then there's lots of tall growing junipers and tree like junipers, and lots of species. There's a lot of different species in that genus Juniperus. This one is kind of an intermediate between a ground cover and a larger growing upright juniper. It'll spread across this bank. Ultimately, we have to cut this lantana off the top of it occasionally because the lantana is super aggressive during the summertime. The reason that this is about a 2.5 foot drop out of the front garden down to the driveway, and we have really struggled with plants across this bank. It is super, super dry. Not trying to create a garden here that's got to be watered constantly. So what do you put on a spot that would have to be watered every single day if I picked the wrong thing? Juniper. Almost any juniper are extremely drought tolerant. Once they get established, that doesn't mean you can plant something on a slope like this and then just walk away from it and ignore it. You got to get it rooted in. But once it is, this is a plant that's just not going to need any ongoing attention from us now that it's rooted into the ground. But it's a really great pop of color out here. I really like this container with just 2 things in it. We saw the same thing over there with that little lime nandina and the polka dot plant over there were just 2 things. This Mullenbeckia or wire vine growing up under this Paul's Gold Cameocypris looks great. It's simple, but it's, you know, perfect plant. This one, you know, it's kind of the thriller and the filler and the spiller all on its own. These can get quite big in the ground, but this one's called Paul's Gold. You know, the threadleaf cypress we see all over the place, but here, you know, down south, they can get a little bit bleached during the summertime. Not as happy in the heat of the southeast, but this one was picked for its heat, you know, for its overall heat tolerance, and it'll keep this great coloration through the entire summer. I had this in a little too much shade for a little while, and it lost a little bit of the color on it, but got it back out here in a good sunny spot. I expect all the new growth on it to continue to really have that really great pop of color that these threadleaf cypress can really show off during the summertime. So there's an example of just a few of the things here in the garden. Again, some of them have to be protected in different ways depending on where you live. Some of them require the sun, like that nightlight Cameocypris, this Paul's Gold. They absolutely, and that sunshine ligustrum, the lemon lime nandina, the touch of gold holly over there, that juniper out front, they require the sun to keep that coloration. If you put them in too much shade, they'll turn green on us. The new growth will just be kind of a green color. Some of the other things we've seen need a little bit of protection. That hosta needs a little bit of protection to keep that gold from burning on it. That weigela we saw bleaching. The redbud back here needs a little bit of protection. That sunshine, Florida Sunshine Elysium over there requires some protection in order for it to keep that gold coloration and not burn in the full sun. So there you go. Are there any variegated or chartreuse colored plants in your garden that are really showing off right now? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.